Lofgren and Emily Henle, two devoted lovers of the outdoors, set off on what they thought would be a simple camping trip into Death Valley. They packed carefully, carrying water, camping gear, and enough food and supplies to last at least a full day. On April 3, 2021, they left their home in Helendale, California, expecting a short escape into the wilderness. But by the very next day, their relaxing getaway had turned into a nightmare they could never have imagined. Alex was well known among friends for pushing into remote, hard-to-reach places, and Emily had gradually learned to share his passion for these off-the-grid journeys. That morning, the couple had mapped out an easygoing plan, explore a few of Death Valley's most famous landmarks, and then spend the night beneath the open desert sky. They weren't aiming for a fixed campsite, just a general area where they could pitch camp when evening came. Earlier that same day, a park ranger had suggested they try a hidden spot deep inside the park, accessible only by a rough and lonely backcountry road. For Alex and Emily, who thrived on adventure, it sounded perfect. So they took the advice and headed toward Gold Valley Road, an uneven, dusty track that twisted through the middle of the desert. The trail was remote and harsh, but it still looked passable. Behind the wheel of their Subaru Forester, a sturdy vehicle designed for tough terrain, they felt confident they could manage whatever lay ahead. The deeper they drove into the park, the more the scenery transformed around them. Death Valley began to show its true nature, a landscape so harsh and unforgiving it seemed frozen in time, where silence pressed in from every direction. This valley, the lowest elevation on the North American continent, had been carved by ancient natural forces into a vast, otherworldly basin filled with endless salt flats, jagged canyons, and dunes scorched by the relentless sun. Towering mountains hemmed them in on all sides, their colors shifting with the changing light of day. It was breathtaking and merciless all at once, a place of staggering beauty, but also of brutal extremes, where temperatures could soar to world records, and the land itself offered little mercy. For seasoned explorers like Alex and Emily, this harsh wilderness felt like both a playground and a test of will. Few people dared to stray so far from the main routes, yet they embraced the challenge. But around 5:30 that evening, their sense of wonder was shattered. Two sharp cracks rang out, breaking the desert's stillness. Emily's stomach twisted with dread. They pulled the vehicle to the side and climbed out, only to discover that both tires on the passenger side had been ripped open by a jagged rock jutting from the dirt road. With only a single spare tire and no cell signal for miles, they realized they were stranded in the middle of Death Valley, 22 miles from the nearest paved road. There was no shade to rest under, no water source in sight, and no simple way to reach help. Their survival instincts took over almost immediately. The couple, normally well prepared for challenges, began weighing their options. That night, they spread maps and guidebooks across their laps, sketching out a plan for the morning. They filled a day pack with several liters of water, packed pouches of tuna tucked in their survival kit, and gathered every small item that might prove useful. They spent the night inside their Subaru, doing their best to rest and gather strength for the difficult hike that awaited them. At 4 a.m, they woke and faced a pivotal choice. Instead of backtracking along the same 22 miles they had already driven, they opted for a different route, a trail that wound through a mountain pass toward Mormon Point, hoping it would bring them closer to people or at least to help. The trail they selected cut through a rugged canyon framed by steep cliffs and dizzying drop-offs. Before leaving, they scribbled a message and left it in the car, 2 flat tires. Headed to Mormon Point, carrying 3 days' supply of water. They did everything they could to increase their chances of being spotted, leaving visible markers of distress around the vehicle. On the ground, they arranged stones into a giant arrow pointing toward their intended direction. Then, while the desert was still cloaked in pre-dawn darkness, they began to walk. The desert was unexpectedly bright under the moonlight, which cast pale silver shadows across the sand and rock. Though both of them understood that their situation might literally be life or death, they still managed to take small moments to notice and even appreciate the stark, haunting beauty around them. When they reached the trail, Alex stopped to gather a few stones, carefully arranging them into another arrow, just in case anyone stumbled across their path later and needed to follow. By about 8 a.m., a spark of hope appeared. They stumbled upon a geocache hidden along the trail. Inside was a logbook and small trinkets left behind by other hikers. The discovery reassured them that others had indeed come this way before, giving them a much-needed surge of optimism. They pressed forward, but the trek quickly grew more punishing. The path narrowed into a slot canyon, its walls towering overhead, and the terrain became harsher with jagged rocks and steep inclines. As they flipped through the logbook from the geocache, they had noticed a note mentioning a 70-foot waterfall not far ahead. Roughly a mile later, they found it, and dread settled over them. Before them, water plunged down the face of a sheer cliff. There was no straightforward way down. The route clearly required climbing equipment, ropes, harnesses, gear they didn't carry. They searched the surrounding area for another possible descent, but came up empty. With no clear alternatives, they made a grim decision: push forward, even if it meant trying to scale the cliff itself. Alex began looking for natural handholds, ledges, stones, anything that might serve as makeshift steps. Emily stood back, nerves fraying, and called out to him to be cautious. One step at a time, she urged. Don't take risks. Move slowly. Please be careful. Alex moved with care, but eventually reached a point where the cliff face offered no more safe holds. He called up to her, I don't see a good way down. I'm going to climb back up. Emily kept scanning the area, desperately searching for something, anything, that could help. And then she heard him cry out, I lost my grip. A wave of panic tore through her. What do you mean you lost your grip? She screamed. Her eyes started everywhere as she scrambled for something, a branch, a rope, even the smallest handhold. But she found nothing. Within seconds, Alex slipped. He plummeted 70 feet down the waterfall's rock face and vanished from view. Emily's own scream echoed against the canyon walls as she froze in place, paralyzed by horror. Standing at the edge, her chest pounded and her mind spun, unable to process what had just unfolded. She was alone now, terrified and shaken to the core. For the first time, she had no idea what her next move should be. By some almost impossible stroke of luck, Alex was still alive. From below, his faint voice called up to Emily, pleading with her to find help. The urgency in his words made clear that every passing second mattered. Just minutes earlier, before his fall, she had noticed a possible way down, a narrow crack cutting along the left side of the canyon wall. Alex had tumbled down the right side, but this fissure on the opposite cliff, though treacherously steep, appeared to be her only chance of reaching him. Without giving herself time to reconsider, Emily made a gut-wrenching decision. Her own safety no longer mattered. She had to get to him. She edged over to the left wall of the canyon and spread her arms wide, pressing against the jagged rock on both sides of the fissure to brace her body. Inch by inch, she began to lower herself into the depths below. About halfway down, she hit a point where the stone gave her no more holds. 30 feet of empty space still separated her from the bottom. Thinking quickly, she tossed her backpack down first, hoping it would cushion the fall. Drawing one long, steady breath, Emily released her grip. The impact was brutal. Pain exploded through her legs as she landed. She heard the sickening crack of bone the moment her feet struck the ground. Her ankle had snapped cleanly. Somehow, though, nothing else seemed critically damaged. Running on a surge of adrenaline and raw fear, she forced herself upright and limped in Alex's direction. But the sight waiting for her was crushing. His injuries were far too severe. Alex was gone. He died there in the canyon on Easter Sunday, April 4th, 2021. Grief consumed her, but she couldn't give in. Not yet. She had to assess the situation. Reality hit her like another fall from the cliff. They were stranded on a ledge halfway down the canyon. Beneath them yawned another 100-foot vertical drop, completely impossible to descend. Even if her ankle hadn't been shattered, there was no way out. The canyon walls closed in like a prison, wrapping her in isolation, guilt, and helplessness. That night, she wept quietly into the dark, but the shadows gave her no comfort. When dawn finally came, She prayed she would wake from a nightmare. But the truth was merciless. Alex was still gone. She was still broken, still alone, and still trapped. Still, Emily refused to surrender. She carefully took stock of what remained from the supplies they had packed the night before: bottles of water, a few pouches of tuna, and most importantly, the survival kit. Inside it, she found a Mylar emergency blanket, which she rigged into a crude shelter by propping it against a pile of nearby rocks. Yet the item she came to value above all else was something small but powerful: the solar charger she had wisely carried with her. The charger kept her phone running. Not for calling, of course. There was no service this deep in Death Valley, but for something almost as vital: keeping a journal. Writing gave her an anchor, a way to hold on to her sanity and preserve a thread of hope. Every day she typed the same words: "We will be rescued. We will get out of here." And though she clung to those lines, part of her understood the truth: the odds were stacked heavily against her. This was among the most desolate corners of Death Valley, remote, silent, and utterly merciless. The canyon offered scraps of shade, but it couldn't protect her from the desert's brutality. Each afternoon, right around 1:30, the sun would pierce the narrow opening above, flooding the ledge with searing light and punishing heat. Dehydration crept in, sunburns scorched her skin, new enemies she was forced to fight daily. By luck, she found a shallow recess carved into the ledge, just wide enough for her to crawl into during the worst hours. For roughly 4 hours each day, it granted her a brief reprieve from the sun's rage. To survive, Emily created structure, a daily checklist of tasks she had to finish before the desert reached its cruelest peak. At the very top of that list was one simple command: endure the afternoon, make it to evening, repeat. Beside her, the waterfall was no breathtaking cascade, but the thin trickle of water that slid down the canyon wall became her lifeline. It was hardly more than a steady drip, yet it gave her enough to refill her bottles and keep her alive. Existing on that narrow ledge, with Alex's body lying just feet away, turned every passing hour into a struggle. Grief weighed on her chest. The heat baked her skin, pain pulsed through her ankle, and despair hovered like a shadow. And yet she endured. With meager resources and sheer determination, Emily leaned on the one gift the canyon gave her: the trickling stream. Using a mix of grit and creativity, she built a tiny dam that allowed the water to pool. There she could soak her towel and her clothing, a makeshift way to cool her body against the blistering heat. The Mylar blanket, originally packed for warmth during cold desert nights, became something far more valuable. She transformed it into a multi-purpose tool, most often a shield against the pitiless sun. But the flimsy metallic sheet wasn't made for such punishment. Wind, sharp rocks, and constant use tore it apart piece by piece. Nearly every day she devoted an hour to patching it back together, using bandages from her survival kit like makeshift stitches. Next to food and water, that fragile sheet of foil-like material became the item she cherished most. And with every day that passed, its importance only grew, a thin barrier between her and the unrelenting desert. Far away from the lonely canyon where Emily fought to stay alive, the outside world had begun to take notice of their disappearance. Word of the missing couple spread quickly across the country, and search and rescue crews poured into Death Valley, scouring every trail, landmark, and remote backcountry road. By Wednesday, April 7, 2021, for full days had slipped by since Alex and Emily had vanished. On that day, search teams carefully swept the Death Valley Highway and the surrounding points of interest. Then came the critical lead. Before leaving, Alex had signed into a backcountry log, noting the area they intended to explore. That single breadcrumb guided rescuers to Gold Valley Road. There, they discovered the couple's white Subaru abandoned, coated in a layer of desert dust. Inside, they found a handwritten note pointing to the pair's last known direction toward Mormon Point. It was the breakthrough searchers had desperately needed. The next morning, April 8th, Emily heard a sound that had no place in the canyon, the distant thrum of helicopter blades slicing the air. Her pulse quickened. This is it, she thought. Snatching up the Mylar blanket, she waved it furiously overhead. The helicopter roared above, but flew on without noticing her. Moments later, the sound returned, louder now, bouncing off the canyon walls. She swung the blanket again, frantic, begging silently, "Please see me." This time, the aircraft slowed. A glint of sunlight off the reflective sheet gave her away. At last, they had spotted her. Alex and Emily's trail had finally been uncovered. Relief swelled in her chest until the helicopter pulled away. Emily stood frozen, staring as it disappeared beyond the cliffs. Still, she understood what it meant. They had seen her. The rescue operation was underway. An hour passed, then another, and another. The long day dragged on. Eventually, the sun crept over the canyon rim, returning like an old tormentor. With no other choice, Emily fell back into her survival routine, soak the towel, dampen her clothing, crawl into the shaded nook, and wait. But just as night began to swallow the canyon around 7:30 p.m., a new sound filled the air, higher-pitched, closer, unmistakable. A drone hovered above, a bright spotlight shining down onto her. It wasn't there to pull her out, only to check her condition and confirm contact. Relief mingled with frustration. She had been found, yes, but still not rescued. Another night of endurance loomed ahead. Yet now she no longer felt completely abandoned. Help was closer than ever. At dawn the following morning, Emily clung to a fragile hope. She strained her ears, waiting. Then she heard it, the deep, unmistakable thump of rotor blades cutting through the stillness of morning. This time, it was a Navy search and rescue helicopter. A wave of relief washed over her. But her ordeal wasn't finished yet. The canyon's brutal terrain would make the rescue anything but easy. The jagged terrain of the Slot Canyon turned the rescue into a nightmare. The first attempt was a hoist operation, lowering 2 rescuers down toward her. But the canyon's twisting, narrow walls, combined with the unpredictable gusts stirred up by the helicopter's blades, made the descent nearly impossible. For 20 agonizing minutes, Emily watched them struggle, fighting against both gravity and stone. Time after time, the wind shoved them off course. At last, defying the odds, they reached her. The team secured Emily into a stretcher, fastening every strap to prepare her for the lift. As the hoist began pulling her upward, she clenched her eyes shut. The sensation of rising above jagged cliffs, above the place of so much trauma, was overwhelming. She couldn't bring herself to look. But curiosity won. She cracked her eyes open. Spread out beneath her was the barren sprawl of Death Valley, a vast sea of beige and stone stretching endlessly to the horizon. Thus she had been found in such a remote wilderness felt unreal. It was nothing short of a miracle. The helicopter carried her to safety, rushing her to a nearby hospital, where surgeons performed emergency procedures on her shattered ankle. She remained there for 6 days, recovering under constant medical supervision. Doctors later explained that one seemingly small choice, keeping her shoe on after the fall, had prevented dangerous swelling and, in all likelihood, saved her foot. Once she was stable enough to travel, Emily returned home to Cincinnati, Ohio. She had endured one of the harshest environments on Earth, leaving with the burden of loss, the resilience of survival, and a story almost impossible to believe. In Alex's memory, legislation he had once championed was renamed and signed into law, the Alexander Lofgren Veterans and Parks Act, granting veterans and Gold Star families free lifetime access to national parks. The bill was officially passed in December 2021. That law now stands as a permanent tribute to a man who believed in the healing power of the wild and to the woman who showed the world the unshakable strength of the human spirit. Emily Henle's ordeal is a story of heartbreaking loss, astonishing endurance, and survival against impossible odds. Faced with devastation, she chose to move forward. And by doing so, she continues to honor the memory of Alex Lofgren every single day. If this story touched you, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more extraordinary true stories of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable human will.